Hello everyone, welcome back to Alicia's Whisper. I hope you like the videos so far. I'm still very new to this, so please bear with me. The more I learn and get comfortable with recording, the better the content will be. I'll get the hang of it soon. Now let's pick up right where we left off. Insatiable Dhampir, Chapter 9, The Journey Begins. Just as Leon says, an elegant blue and gold carriage arrives in front of the cottage early the next morning. Two men knock on the door and introduce themselves. I'm Elliot, ma'am, and this is my brother Edgar. We will be escorting you to Sinclair Manor. Mom is already headed for the carriage. Oh, I'm ready. If I'd known such fine men were going to escort me, I would have been ready sooner. They both smile as they load our things on top of the carriage. Edgar offers his hand to help Mom inside. Elliot does the same for me. I'm not used to such treatment, so I climb in myself. He closes the door, then climbs on with his brother and begins to steer the carriage. And just like that, I'm headed to a new life I certainly wasn't prepared for. We spend the next several hours just admiring the scenery. I never really took the time to notice how beautiful the world is, I muttered, looking out the carriage window. Mom just shakes her head. I blame your father. He didn't stop to smell the roses either, always looking over his shoulder and worrying that someone was going to kill us. That worry was warranted, I speak. She just glares at me. It most certainly was not. He should have spent more time making memories with us, instead of acting like a bodyguard. I may not be strong like you two, but I can handle myself just fine. You know I have the same strength as a grown man, right? That's not exactly strong by vampire standards, I say sarcastically. She waves her hand dismissively. Oh, hush. You're plenty strong, in more ways than one. Just then, Edgar spoke up. We should be arriving at an inn very soon. I hope it's to your liking, ma'am. Seriously? To my liking? What does he think, I was raised by the Queen? I spent half my life on the move. As dusk began to settle in, we arrived at a nice inn. Well, nicer than our cottage. Dinner was served to us in our rooms. It was one of the best meals I've ever had. Mom smiles. Just think, tomorrow we'll be eating like this every day. This whole thing is so stressful. I wish I could just go outside and practice my combat stances. That's the only thing that ever seemed to calm me. Mom rubs my back gently, sensing my frustration with it all. Come, dear, let's get some sleep. She goes to her own bed and blows out the lantern. I spend the next few hours just tossing and turning until exhaustion takes me. Chapter 10, New Home. The next morning, we quickly got dressed and ate breakfast. Before long, we were on the road again. The closer we got to Leon's estate, the more nervous I got. What are the other leaders of the vampire houses like? Do any of the other houses share Leon's sentiment? And how would they respond to me? I snapped back to reality as Elliot called out, We've arrived! Take a look! Mom and I looked out of the carriage and just stared at the house in shock. It's a beautiful mansion surrounded by acres of land. It's bigger than the village we just came from. We exit the carriage and Mom begins to jump up and down like an excited little girl. Oh, this is just magnificent! How many bedrooms do you think it has? She asks. I shrug, saying, No idea. Probably more than all the houses in the village combined. That statement just makes Mom even more excited. I sigh and wait for Elliot and Edgar to show us inside. Please follow us, they say it in unison. We enter the foyer and are immediately surrounded by beautiful paintings and sculptures. And in the middle was an elegant grand staircase with a huge chandelier hanging above it. I blink a few times, attempting not to be blinded by it all. Just then, a short, well-mannered man with light, ashy hair and green eyes enters and greets us with a bow. Welcome to Sinclair Manor. I am Michael Richards, the head butler. I hope your trip went smoothly, he says, with a polite smile on his face. My mother introduces us excitedly. This is my daughter Zena, and I'm Roxana. It's a pleasure. She curtsies to him. I roll my eyes. Really, Mom? We haven't been here 5 minutes, you're already acting like the gentry? Michael begins to take us on a tour of the estate. Behind the manor is a beautiful garden with a beautiful fountain in the middle of it. We pass by a somewhat smaller house that's next to a pond. The master has informed me that the guest house is yours, Madame Roxana. It is almost done being refurbished and should be ready by this evening, he says. Mom beams with happiness. This is all surreal. I have never seen such a wonderful home. Mr. Richards slightly nods and then looks at me. He seems to notice my silence and says, Is there anything you require, Madame Zena? Please do not hesitate to ask. I give him a small smile. I'm fine, thank you, and please just call me Zena. He seems taken aback for a moment, but returns to the smile he had on his face. I guess he's not used to being treated like a normal person. I start to wonder. None of these people we've met so far have been hostile towards me. It's odd. It's very easy to tell that I'm not human. Does it not bother them? I guess it doesn't, since they work for the head of a vampire house. I'm sure Leon treats them all with respect. As the sun sets, we head upstairs and come to the end of a hallway. He stops in front of a huge door. This is the master suite. He opens the door and my jaw drops. This whole room is bigger than our entire cottage. He smiles and continues. Master Leon asked me to show you this to you. However, he also had another room prepared for you just in case you didn't feel comfortable sharing his suite. I blink in shock. He's actually giving me the choice to either share his room or have my own? Leon continues to surprise me. Mr. Richard smiles and shows me the room that's been prepared for me. It's right next to Leon's suite. Dinner will be ready for you in just a short while. Please take this time to get freshened up for dinner. There are gowns in the closet. Please wear any one you wish. Mom and I slowly enter the room and Michael closes the door behind us. There is a wide bed with a beautiful canopy above it. Next to it is a wooden vanity with a large mirror. Mom heads for the closet and pulls out 2 beautiful gowns. She certainly doesn't waste any time. "Zena, look at these!" she exclaimed. I take one of the dresses and lightly touch the extravagant beading. Mom takes the other dress and holds it up to her chest and looks in the mirror. Oh, if only your father could see me in this. He'd be so smitten with me. I smile at the thought. I'm sure he would be, Mom. I helped her put on the dress that she picked out. It's a flowing orange dress with beautiful gold beading. Then she helps me put on a fiery red gown that sparkles more than it should. Mom then sits me in front of the vanity and begins to do my hair. I'm not used to having my hair up away from my face. And in no time at all, we were ready for dinner. Chapter 11. Dinner is served. We enter the massive dining room. On the table is an array of dishes from smoked meats to delicate desserts. Leon is sitting at the head of the table. When he sees us, he stands and smiles. He makes his way towards us and takes my hand. I'm so glad you both made it safely. You both look astonishing. His gaze lingers for a second, and I can't seem to look away. Why can't I look away? Mom coughs loudly, and we snap out of our trance. Please, allow me, he says politely. He escorts us to the table and pulls out a chair on his left for Mom, and then does the same for me on his right. We both sit down, and then he returns to his seat. He stretches his arms out and says, "Please enjoy." We each begin to make ourselves a plate, and to my surprise, so does Leon. Wait, you're eating too? I ask. He smirks. Yes, I still enjoy eating such fine dining. I shake my head to get rid of the shock and begin to eat. This food is far better than the meal we had at the inn. I'm not used to having so much food all at once. I'm definitely out of my element here. I begin to become anxious. Leon senses this and places his hand on mine. I know it's all a bit much, but I hope you'll both get used to this life quickly. That just makes me even more anxious. The thought of this being my new life is a surreal feeling. He removes his hand to begin speaking with my mom. I hope everything is to your liking, Madame Roxana. She smiles at him and replies, It's all so wonderful, and please, it's just Roxana. After all, we will be family one day. My eyes go wide. I almost forgot why I was here. Thankfully, no one seemed to notice, and I composed myself. Leon continues, Yes, that's a good point. I ask you to call me Leon in return. She nods, seeming happy with herself. I wasn't prepared for what she said next. So when's the wedding? I hope it'll be a big affair. Leon chuckles and replies, I plan on making it a summer wedding. Of course, it will have to be held at night. Mom giggles and nods. That sounds awfully romantic. I can just picture Zena in a beautiful white gown with extravagant jewels around her neck, the moonlight illuminating her face. Please let this conversation end. I'm not sure how much more of this I can take. Leon turns to me and says, Is that all right with you? If it's too soon, we can certainly put it off as long as you need. I'm actually surprised for a moment. He's a lot more considerate than I imagined he'd be. I think for a moment and then respond. If I'm being honest, I've always wanted a winter wedding. I love that time of year. Having all the snow surrounding you just makes it all more beautiful. He smiles and nods. I agree. That's a wonderful idea. A winter wedding it is, then. I didn't expect him to agree so easily. I figured he needed us to get married as soon as possible. I asked him, Are you sure it's okay to wait so long? I mean, you did say that time isn't a luxury you have. He nods and says, Yes, that's true, but I care about making you comfortable with this whole idea. After all, it's not just me that's getting married. I nod. You'll meet the other houses in a few weeks at a ball I'll be throwing. I'll introduce you as my fiancé then, he says. I nod in understanding and finish eating my meal. After we've all finished, he stands and says, Well, Roxana, your house should be ready. I'll have Michael escort you to it whenever you wish. Mom does and takes Leon's large hand. Thank you for all the hospitality. We both appreciate it so much. I will see you both tomorrow evening. She bows her head and follows Michael out of the dining room. It's just Leon and I now. He turns to me and says, "I will take you to your room now." He holds out his arm and I hesitantly take it. "I think I should try to adjust to your sleeping habits. After all, we're going to be married in about a year's time." He nods and grins. "And you'd like to spend more time with me, is that it?" he asks confidently. I blush and say, Don't flatter yourself," as I avert his gaze. He chuckles and says, "Well then, let's go to the parlor. I can tell you about the other houses over some tea." I nodded and we quickly changed direction and headed to the parlor. As we sat down, Michael entered with some tea. He places the tray down, bows, and exits. "How did he do that? You didn't even ask him yet." Leon chuckles. "I usually have tea after dinner. It helps me relax." I nod in understanding and wait for him to begin. After taking a sip of his tea, he looks me in the eyes and says, "Well then, where to begin?" Chapter 12, The Four Houses. As I sip my tea, Leon begins to explain everything from the beginning. Ever since vampires first came in contact with the human world, there have been 4 houses that governed over all vampires. Every head of each house is succeeded by an heir of sorts every 500 years. I nodded and urged him to continue. "You already know of my house, the Sinclair house. The other 3 houses are the Sterling house, the Miller house, and the Davis house. The Sterling house is the only other house that agrees with my views on humans and Dhampirs, while the Davis house sees them both only as a food source and nothing more," he says, seeming slightly agitated. "I see. And what about the Miller house?" I ask. He sighs and says, "They're sort of neutral. The head of the Miller house doesn't really care about all of this. He just wants to stay out of this whole thing." I shake my head. That doesn't really help us. Leon nods in agreement. I finish my tea, then ask, "What are the other leaders like?" "The head of the Sterling house is Lindsay Sterling. She's kind, but don't mistake it for weakness. She doesn't take crap from anyone and is often brutally honest. Once she sees you as a friend, she's a friend for life." I smile. Sounds like someone I could get along with. Leon nods and continues. "Then there's Jackson Davis. He is very brash and has a short temper. He can also be very dangerous if provoked. He has extensive knowledge in military combat. He is the one you need to be wary of." I nod. "Okay, I'll be on my guard around him." And finally, there's Claude Miller. He doesn't have a brave bone in his body and is obsessed with women and wine. I roll my eyes. Of course there's someone like that as the leader of a house. Living a luxurious life will spoil anyone if not kept in check. I then say, "I notice the house names are your last names. How exactly do you pass it off to an heir? Vampires can't have children that are full vampires, right?" Leon smirks at me. "Yes, it's true we can't produce our own biological vampire children, though that doesn't stop us from trying." I grin slightly. "Very funny." "Well, I certainly thought so," he says ruefully. "To answer your question, we each choose an heir, and whatever their last name is becomes the new house name." "Oh, I get it now. The house names don't stay the same each time a new heir takes over." He nods and continues. "The previous head of my house was Jesse Dark." I laugh. "You mean the previous house was the Dark House? That makes him sound like a villain." He laughs with me. That's exactly how I reacted. "Okay, so we've talked about the houses and who leads them. Is there anything else I need to know?" Before he can continue, I notice his eyes. They're blood red. He wants to feed. I suddenly got very nervous. I'd never been fed off before. "I guess dinner didn't really curb your hunger," I say, trying to calm myself. "I'm sorry this happened so soon. Do you mind?" he asked softly. I shook my head and offered him my wrist. Normally vampires use the jugular vein on the neck to feed. However, that's too intimate for me. But he smiles and gently takes hold of my wrist. He licks his lips and bites down. Hard. I wince slightly, but he doesn't notice. It feels strange, but pleasant somehow. His lips are warm and soft. I just sit there and watch him. My face begins to flush. This feels so good. I'm not sure what to do with myself. I try to be as still as possible. He sits there and feeds for at least half an hour. Once he finally finishes, his eyes return to their normal color. He takes a handkerchief and wipes his mouth. "Did I taste good?" I ask, not realizing I said that out loud. He smirks, licks his lips, and says, "Delicious." I blink a couple of times. I wasn't expecting that answer. He chuckles and states, "Well, now that we've both had our meals and learned about the houses, let's use the rest of this time to get to know each other better," he says seductively. All I can do is sit there and nod. And that concludes the next 4 chapters of Insatiable Dhampir. Remember, if you liked the story so far, please leave a like, and if you're not already, subscribe to the channel. This is Alithia, signing off.